Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Terry Fralich's 1985 Asian Journey, Part 2. This was a trip that Terry Fralich took with his father, Harold Fralich, my father's cousin, and a group from the Sierra Club, mostly in Nepal, in South Asia. And they were hiking in the Himalaya mountains. And they were helped by a group of Nepalese who helped them. This was originally the second third of Zook Family Memories collection, or ZFMC number 15. April 25th, 1985. 10,000 feet in the foothills of the Himalayas. Yesterday was an even longer day than the one before. We were on the trail by 6:30 and spent the first several hours on a path that hugged the side of the mountain and climbed sharply. On the right there was nothing to give any sense of security, as the ground fell away to the riverbed 1,000 feet below. By 10 o'clock we had left the hillside trail and entered a woods. It felt good to have secure ground around me on both sides, even if it was constantly rising and falling. Lunch was at 10:30 as usual. Just as we were finishing, a herd of 40 to 50 goats came wandering down the trail, eating their way through the vegetation with virtually every step. We shortened a post-lunch rest and quickly headed off so that we would not be caught in the middle of the herd as we hiked on. Early in the afternoon, we confronted the steepest descents and ascents we had seen so far. Drop-offs that gave you no idea of their course until you stood at the top and looked directly down. Slowly we made our way, single file, watching with each step where the person in front had placed his foot, looking for loose rocks and secure handholds. At first glance, the dramatic pitch was unnerving, but as we gained a feel for the trail, the sense of adventure and accomplishment was exhilarating. Late in the afternoon, Dad and I walked alone, taking our time on the many rocky uphill stretches. We talked of the adjustments on the trek, of the necessity of finding our own way and being contented with it, regardless of your pace or position related to the others on the trek. We both realized more clearly the importance of taking one step, one moment at a time, bringing your attention fully to the present, without anticipation of what lay ahead. The mountains, the hours of walking teach you that, or at least remind you in a way that is not easy to forget. Dad obviously felt it himself and decided to make it the central theme of the sermon he was to give at church when he returned to Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Just before we reached camp, the trail opened to a clearing cut off by the stream we had been hearing. On the other side of the water, in tall, dense trees, large, white-faced monkeys were playing in the branches, swinging from limb to limb, and then pausing to watch us as we stared at them. Clearly, we are in Nepal and not on some trail in the high Sierras in California. By 3:30, we were in camp. It had been 8 hours of walking, but it didn't seem as fatiguing as the day before. Apparently, our bodies were adjusting. At dawn of day 4, our Nepali cowherd, where we had camped, bid us good morning and goodbye, and we began up a steep set of crude stone steps that rose sharply from his meadow. The path soon led through tall trees, casting dark shadows, and gave the area a medieval feeling. I fully expected to see Robin Hood or Little John waiting around the corner. Further on, the moss carpeted the trees in a velvet green that reflected a golden sheen in the sun. From time to time there were openings in the forest, small mountain meadows decorated with bright reds and pure whites of rhododendrons in bloom, purple wildflowers and yellow bushes, all against a backdrop of meadow green. What a magnificent walk! What a glorious day! We were scheduled for a rest this afternoon, and everyone was looking forward to it. After all, we had climbed from 1,000 feet the first afternoon to 10,500 feet at 10:30 this morning. We had earned a few hours off. Camp quickly went up in a large meadow as the staff took care of their usual activities. The Sherpas, Mingma, Dawa, and Kurpa, our trek leaders, saw to it that the tents were pitched so that we could unpack and organize our gear for the night. Padam and Mingma number 2, the cooks, were already well into preparing lunch, having moved quickly ahead of us to camp, as they always do. The kitchen boys, Jai, Dan, Bahadar, Mila, and Shalem Singh were bringing us tea as we took off our packs, and marveled at the beautiful spot that had been located for us. Of course, Ram, the Trek Siddhar and head Sherpa, was overseeing and directing everything. Just as we were about to eat lunch, our porters arrived, 30-plus of them in a line, greeting us with namaste and broad smiles, happy that they too had the afternoon off. April 26, 1985. 12,000 feet at a high mountain meadow just under our first pass. Tea wasn't to be served until 6 o'clock this morning, but I was still awake early and was out doing my stretching by a little after 5 o'clock. The last stars were still twinkling and promised us a clear sky for the start of our day. First on the agenda was a health check with Lynn, who had shown serious signs of the flu the day before. She was feeling much better, so the decision was made to break camp and head for our first pass. The initial hours led us through woods, moving steadily uphill, but at a manageable pitch. Through one lovely meadow and then into large shrubs of some kind, we slowly wound our way up, feeling a bit more of the altitude than on previous days. About 3 hours from our start, we reached a ridge with magnificent views of the valley on the other side, and the mountains all around. Behind us, rising majestically, was Luri, a moderately high peak we had figured to be about 19,000 feet. The trail led along the ridge toward the pass, often hugging the mountainside with precious little ground on the valley side. By 11:30, we reached a large, wonderfully green meadow that spread for 15 to 20 acres just below the pass. Tea was served as we arrived, and it tasted even better than usual as we looked out at the magnificent vistas from our 12,000 feet perch. Mother Nature had a little surprise for us, though. Just as we sat down to lunch, small dry flakes of snow began pouring down. What a sight we must have made, sitting in a circle eating our vegetable curry and toast in the virtually blinding snow. The storm did let up after lunch, but the snow fell off and on for hours, and Dad and I spent most of the afternoon in our tent reading and writing. Late in the afternoon, the skies cleared and the sun broke through for one glorious hour of warming rays. The white dusting of snow on the meadow and the mountainsides above us quickly vanished in the waning afternoon sun. 100 yards above our tents, the staff made their quarters in a stone hut used by shepherds when they bring their goat herds to the high meadows for summer grazing. The hut was 15 feet by 30 feet and was constructed of flat rocks carefully laid on top of each other. Several crude beams spanned the roof and provided support for larger flat stones that looked like slate. There were no windows or chimneys. Smoke from hundreds of fires blackened the inside of the hut as it found its way out the cracks in the ceiling. Excuse me. After dinner, 7 or 8 from the group joined the staff in the hut, where singing, drum playing, and dancing were already in progress. We sat in 3 concentric circles around the small fire as the Nepalis took turns doing their native dances in a small 3-foot round space next to the fire. One after another, they hopped, jumped, and twirled, their bare feet coming within inches of the fire. I was fascinated by the dances, and twice rose from the second circle to try my interpretation of what I had been watching. No easy task. The ceilings were made for Nepalis, not for Americans of even moderate height like me. The dance space was small, and the 12,000-foot altitude quickly had a dizzying effect in the smoky room. Nevertheless, I did my own jumping and twirling, bumping my head a couple of times, and had a grand time. All through the evening there was much clapping, cheering, and laughing, and we all felt a real camaraderie with these playful, warm, and generous people. Sunday, April 28th. Camped on terraces hugging the mountainside, 9,000 feet. Yesterday was very difficult for me. We got up early to climb above our meadow in hopes of getting clear views of Ganesh Himal range behind the ridges above us. We went up to about 14,500 feet and were rewarded by our effort by coming face to face with several of the awesome faces of Ganesh. It was difficult to determine specifically which of the 7 Ganesh peaks we were seeing, but our best guess from the map was that it was at least Ganesh numbers 4 and 5, with altitudes in excess of 24,000 feet. As I looked through the binoculars at the rough snow-covered face opposite me, the thought of actually trying to reach the summit of such a mountain seemed like the worst kind of hubris. By the time I had descended to camp from the ridge high above, I had begun to have stomach cramps and felt extremely lethargic generally. Maybe my system was reacting to the dramatic changes of the past few days. Maybe it was the altitude. Probably it was a combination of both. I ate lunch, hoping the food would lift my energy and my spirits, but to no avail. As we headed toward the pass after lunch, I knew that every step the rest of the day was going to be a real effort. We reached the pass in about 45 minutes, and then went down, 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 mostly along a rocky, dried-up stream bed. The footing was difficult. My knee was feeling sore from the constant downhill pressure, but most of all my energies and spirits simply seemed without reserves. Finally, our night's camp, a beautiful green opening in the woods under the shadow of a Ganesh peak, appeared in front of me. I dragged myself through washing and dinner and was in my sleeping bag by 7 o'clock p.m. I awoke one time during the night, but other than that I slept through until Jai and Mila appeared at my tent with tea at 5 o'clock a.m. The long night's sleep did more good than I could possibly have expected or hoped for, and I felt fully rejuvenated. We got a good start at about 6:30 a.m. under clear blue skies, and again began a sharp descent, this time down a stairs of countless carefully placed stones to the villages of Upper Tivling and Lower Tivling. The terraces covering the steep slopes around the villages were all green with cultivation, giving the communities a prosperous look. Our route to the Tivlings is only infrequently trekked by foreigners. Moreover, we were now at least 4 to 5 days' walk from the nearest road. As a result, the sight of a long procession of tall, white-skinned people, dressed in unusual costumes, and carrying any number of bags on their backs and around their necks was obviously a special occasion. As we walked into the upper town, the villagers all came out to greet us, and to gawk and stare. Clearly, we were as much an amusement and curiosity to them as they were to us. The children followed us down to the center of the lower town. It wasn't a town square in the formal sense, but it served the same purpose. At least 100 children of all ages and half as many adults gathered around us, sharing our dharma. We met the local school teacher, a young man who appeared to be no more than 20. He said he was from the area but had been educated in Gorkha, a larger town some days' walk away, and our ultimate destination. He had about 80 boys and 20 girls in school, some of whom made the daily trek from distant houses on the mountain across the valley. Apparently he shared responsibilities with another teacher. We spent about 20 minutes in the town center attempting crude conversation, taking pictures, and just generally milling about with these fascinating people. Their faces were often what we would think of as dirty from living on dirt floors and close to the land. Their clothes in large part were mere rags of remnants of garments wrapped around their small frames. Shining through it all, though, was character and great beauty. Standing among them, I felt admiration and affection. Seeing their curious stares, I also had a strong images of the great white explorer making contact with a simpler people in a distant part of the world. My feeling reflected at least partially the reality of the experience. Our contact with the villagers heightened the difficulty of sharing with the Nepalis. There is a strict policy on the trek of not giving anything to the natives that we encounter. The reasoning is twofold. First, the experience in other heavily trekked areas has been that giving handouts of any kind encourages begging and raises expectations that cannot or should not be satisfied. Secondly, it is felt that giving to one or two individuals causes dissension when you can't provide equally to all. As we walked through Upper Tivling, a variation of the problem confronted us. A father held up his young child who had a badly infected ear and cheek. We have several medical people on the trek, and Pauline, a nurse, went to help the child. But Kern, the trip leader, said she should not, and consequently she did not. I felt anger at Kern's dictate. These people are so warm and generous with us as we walk through their land. We have the ability to help, and yet we are prevented from sharing that which could be given so easily. Again, there is the difficulty of raising false expectations, of not being able to respond to all pleas. But I feel that we should be able to help in certain instances where the need is great, and our help could be meaningful to an individual such as the infected child. The self-imposed prohibition left me feeling frustrated and helpless, possibly inevitable emotions when one comes in contact with a people who could use so much that we have. After leaving the Tivlings, we made the hour's walk across a valley to the smaller village of Fralich. The trail passed by both a crude blacksmith shop and a mill where a man sat cross-legged turning the grinding stone by hand. Hour after hour of grinding grain by hand. The patience of these people. We had lunch at Charlie's. As we were learning, everywhere that we go in this back country of Nepal, if there are natives nearby, we attract a crowd. It must be something not unlike the circus moving through town. At Charlie's, at least 100 people gathered about 20 yards from our lunch spot outside the town and quietly watched us eat and rest for the hour that we were there. We moved out quickly after lunch as the sky threatened rain, and everyone was eager to head toward our campsite for the evening. The destination was Hindung, another village. To get there, we again went to the bottom of the valley, crossed the river that repeatedly dissects the mountains in this area, and then began the long climb up the valley on the opposite side. Since this is a popular route between villages, the path was well maintained, and in many places was another series of long stone steps. The trail was steep, but more disconcerting were the sharp drops of hundreds of feet that constantly fell from the edge of the path as we moved further up the valley. We arrived at Hindung at about 4 o'clock p.m. and found enough space on 3 levels of uncultivated terraces just below the village for our tents. Of course, we attracted more crowds. One man stood on a terrace below our tent, motionlessly watching Dad writing in his journal for 20 minutes. By dinner time, it was raining hard. We had our meal huddled in the dark under the kitchen tarp and then hurried back to the tents for a good, long night's rest. To be continued. So that concludes today's presentation. Terry Fralich's 1985 Asian Journey Part 2. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history, if this interests you. Finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, photographs, and other printed matter, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.